In this video, we're adding an accessible, responsive navigation bar to this page. I've already set up a basic layout as our demo. Now we'll build the nav from scratch using HTML, CSS, and just a bit of JavaScript. I'm using normalize.css, and I have some basic styles already in place. You'll find the full project on GitHub, including a working mobile-friendly demo linked in the description below. On this page, I already have a main with a class of main and a footer with a class of footer. So I'm going to add a header with a class of header, and then a nav element with a class of navigation. Inside the nav element, I'm going to add an unordered list with a class of main menu. And then we'll add 5 list items with a class of nav item, and each list item will have an anchor link. And we'll add home, about, blog, projects, and contact as our menu items. And you can see there that we have a nice unordered list taking shape at the top of the page. That's perfect. So let's go ahead and get this styled for desktop first, and then we'll add in our buttons and mobile responsiveness. So here are the base styles that I already have. I'll go ahead and add a section for the header. First, I'm going to give the header some padding of 0.5 rems, then background color of white, and then just a soft box shadow. And for the box shadow, I'm going to do 0 on the x-axis, 1 pixel on the y-axis, and then we'll do 1 pixel of blur, 1 pixel of spread. And then the RGBA value will be 0, 0, 0 for black, and then 10% opacity. Perfect. Next, we'll start working on the nav element. And I'm going to treat the navigation element as a container for the unordered list. So we'll say navigation. And I'm going to give this a max width of 75 rems, which is 1200 pixels, and margin 0 auto, which centers that container on the page. Next, we'll style the unordered list. And I always start by removing the padding, the margin, and the list style type. And you can see there, just by taking those browser defaults off, the margin, the padding, and those bullets, we have now just a nice column. I'll use Flexbox next to line these up. So I'll do display flex, flex flow, row, and wrap. So if that navigation ever gets really long, it would just wrap to the second line. Then we'll use justify content to space the items evenly across the container, and then align items center to keep them center aligned on the y-axis. And just like that, we already have navigation that's taking shape. Next, I'm going to style the links themselves. And so our class is on the list item, that's nav item, and then I don't have a class on the anchor itself. I generally just put the class on the list item. It helps with styling. So we'll say nav item A. And I'm going to make these display blocks so I can add padding to the elements. And I'm going to add 0.75 rems of padding. That is about 12 pixels. Next, I'm going to increase the font size to 1.25 rems. Then I'm going to change the text decoration color, that's the underline, to transparent. I'll increase the text decoration thickness to 3 pixels. And I'll do a text underline offset of also 3 pixels. Next, I'm going to do text transform uppercase and letter spacing of 1 pixel. And that just spaces those items out a little bit. And I think when your text is uppercase, that just looks really nice. And finally, I'm going to change the color to black. And then next, we're going to go ahead and do a pseudo class for focus, hover, and active. So we'll say nav item A. And we want focus first. Then we want hover. And then we want active. And those pseudo classes should always go in that order: focus, hover, active. And we want to change the color, and we want to change the text decoration color both to pink. Now when we hover, you can see that those change. And you don't want to remove text decoration and then add text decoration when you hover, focus, or active. You want to make sure that that line is there, but that it's just transparent and you're changing the color. Next, let's go ahead and do just a small animation or transition for that hover. So we'll do transition, and I'll use the keyword all, and we'll say 300 milliseconds, and I like to use ease in out. And we should see now that this transition is a little bit softer, a little bit smoother, and that looks really, really nice. These are all of the styles for desktop. Let's add our markup now and make this responsive. First, we're going to add a button element immediately before the navigation. And this is the button that we're going to show on mobile and that opens the navigation. So we'll say button, and I'm going to give this 2 classes: menu button and open button. Next, I'm going to give this an ARIA label of open menu, and that's the text that will be read out loud to a screen reader. Next, we're going to set some ARIA controls, and the ARIA controls will be called main nav. That means we have to add an ID of main nav to the nav. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, button, you control this element. And finally, we're going to add ARIA expanded false. So by default on mobile, the menu is not expanded, and then we'll add just a little bit of JavaScript, so when we open the menu, ARIA expanded will change to true. Inside our button, we're going to use a hamburger menu SVG, and I like to use SVGs from Ionicon. I'll go ahead and leave that link down below. And on the SVG, we're going to use an ARIA hidden true attribute. And this prevents the screen reader from reading out SVGs that are considered purely decorative. So pretty much any SVG that I use, I always put ARIA hidden true. I don't want screen readers reading those out. Next, inside the nav element, we're going to add one more button, and this is the button to close the menu. And again, I'm going to add 2 classes: menu button and close button. And then we're going to add an ARIA label close menu. We don't need an ARIA controls attribute on this button because it's a child of the element that we're controlling, and we don't need the ARIA expanded attribute. And then we'll also use a close SVG icon. And again, we'll add the ARIA hidden true attribute. And now we have accessible buttons in our markup. So let's go ahead and style these. First, I'm going to style the class menu button, which we have on both buttons, and that's going to be display none on desktop because we don't want screen readers to see or have access to those buttons. We don't need them until we're on mobile. And then we're going to remove the padding, the background color, and the border. And we're going to tell the cursor to be a pointer. I'm going to write some base styles for the SVGs. First, I always put display block on my SVGs. By default, they're display inline, and this helps with styling. Next, I'll do width and height of 3 rems. That's 48 pixels, and that is the minimum size that an icon needs to be in order to be accessible, 48 by 48 pixels. Then I'll change the stroke to black, and these SVGs don't have a fill, they have a stroke. Make sure when you're styling your SVGs that you know if you're styling the fill or the stroke. I know that I'm styling the stroke because the attributes in the SVGs say fill none. The stroke is also filled in with current color, and I'm going to remove that from both SVGs and leave that attribute empty. Now I can change the stroke with CSS. Let's check and see how things are actually looking. And this is behaving exactly the way I would expect it to. So if we have more items than fit in that container on desktop, they'll wrap to the second line, which doesn't completely break the layout, although it's not ideal. We can see here also up in the top right corner, we can sort of get a sense of what we want our breakpoint to be. So I typically do a breakpoint of around 768. Let's see where that is. So that would be right in here, 768. You could do a bigger one, you could do a smaller one. I wouldn't want to go any smaller than about 5, maybe 600. But just to be on the safe side, to give you a little room if you want to add more items to your navigation, we're going to go with the breakpoint of 768. And I'm going to leave the window at about 600. So we'll get a good sense for how this looks on mobile. So we'll write a media query at media, max width 768 pixels. And the first thing that I'm going to do is make both buttons display block. And here we can see our SVGs. Perfect. Next, we're going to hide the navigation container. So we're not hiding the header, we're just hiding this nav element. And we do want to hide it in a way that screen readers or assistive technology cannot access it until the button is clicked. So we do not want screen readers to be able to read the menu until the user has clicked the button to show the menu. So we'll say navigation, and I'm going to use visibility hidden and opacity 0. Next, I'm going to position it off screen or off canvas with position fixed and top 0. Next, I'm going to say left 100%, so I'm pushing it from the left 100% off the page, and I'm giving it a width of 300 pixels. So it has a width of 300 pixels, but it is completely pushed off the page. I'm also giving it a height of 100 VH. VH stands for viewport height, so it's as exactly tall as the viewport. And you can see now that it's hidden. Next, I'm going to give it a background color of white. And I'm going to set a value of transform translate x 0. Now, with our JavaScript, we're going to add a class to the body element of menu active. And when we click this hamburger button, menu active will show up here on the body element. We'll use the menu active style on the body in order to style and open the navigation. So I'm going to say menu active dot navigation and we're going to change the visibility and the opacity. So it'll be visibility visible and opacity 1. And then finally, we're going to use transform translate x minus 100%. And that's what's going to slide that to the left. And the way we can test that is by adding menu active to the body. And of course, I didn't spell this correctly. So there we go. And you can see there that that slides out. That's perfect. So I can come right here into our markup and delete that class. And you can see that disappears. And then if I use Command Z or Control Z, we can simulate that. Just like that. Now let's add a little bit of animation to slide that menu out. So on the navigation element, I'm going to do another transition on the transform element, or excuse me, on the transform property. And I generally use 300 milliseconds ease in out for my timing, and that's just habit. That's just something I've gotten into the habit of doing. And we'll go ahead and reload this. And you can see that has a nice slide now. Now here's the catch with closing the menu. We really aren't going to get the same transition when we close the menu because you can't transform visibility. You can go from hidden to visible, but you can't transform something and go from visible to hidden. It just doesn't work that way. And I want you to keep in mind that normal user behavior is that somebody is going to open the menu, click a link, and a new page is going to load. So a transition to close the menu is not a typical user experience. In fact, I would argue that the people who are opening and then closing menus most often are the developers building the menus. So I don't want you to get too wrapped up in the idea that the menu also has to transition closed. We could do that if the navigation wasn't being visually hidden off canvas, but it is, and it needs to be because screen readers should not be able to access it when it's off canvas. So that's just a note that I want you to keep in mind. Now let's go ahead and style the inside of the list, and then we'll go ahead and get our buttons ready. And on the main menu, which is the unordered list, we're going to change the flex direction. Right now, the flex flow is row. We're going to change the flex direction to column. And if we look over here in the Dev Tools, you'll see that these list items do not span the full width. And we really do want them to span the full width, or at least I want them to span the full width. So I'm going to style these to be width 100%. And that's the nav item. And that aligns them to the left, but I do still want them to be text aligned center, and I'm going to give each item a border bottom. And the border is going to be 3 pixels, it's going to be a dotted line, and it's going to be a light gray. And then on the main menu, just at the top of this UL, I'm going to do an additional border at the top. Perfect. Next, I'm going to give the open menu a little bit of a box shadow so it doesn't blend into the page behind it. It'll be pretty much exactly the same as the box shadow on the main header. And you can see now that we have a nice box shadow here on the left. But we want to make sure that we don't have a box shadow when the navigation is closed. So on the navigation class without the menu being open, we'll do a box shadow 0. Now let's style and get our buttons situated. So we'll make sure that our buttons have a focus, hover, and active of the same pink color that we're using for our links. So we'll give each button a border radius of 5 pixels. And we'll do a nice transition of the background color. And then we're going to do a focus, hover, and active. And this will have a background color of pink. And now we have a nice hover. But we also want to change the color, the stroke of the SVG. So on the SVG, we also have to have a transition. And we're transitioning the stroke, and again, 300 milliseconds, ease in, out. And then when we hover, active, focus on the button, we will trigger the SVG stroke. So I'm going to take these 3, and we can just copy those here, and then we'll add SVG. So when we hover on the button, we trigger the SVG. When we focus on the button, we trigger the SVG. When the button is active, we trigger the SVG. And then we change the stroke color to white. Perfect. Now we need to make sure that when the menu is open, we are hiding the open button. So if the menu is open, we don't want screen readers or people who are using the keyboard to navigate to come back and be able to land on a button that says open menu, because the menu is already open. So when the menu is open, we're just going to say visibility hidden to this button. And you can see now that the button is not visible. It is being hidden for screen readers. So the only way to close this menu now is to click on the close button. We're also going to write a little bit of JavaScript, so when people hit the escape key, that will also close the menu. So as long as the menu's open, we don't show the open button. So for this close button, I'm just going to add a little bit of margin. For margin, I want there to be a half rem around the button. So 0.5 rem on the top. I'm actually going to say auto on the right, 0.5 rems on the bottom, and 0.5 rems on the left. And this adds just a nice little bit of space right around this icon, and it also aligns the top of the menu with the top of the header. So, you know, it just looks nice. It just looks aligned. I'm just going to take this class off the body now to close that. I want the open button to be all the way over to the right. Right now it's on the left. I want it on the right. So the easiest way to do that is just to say open button. Margin left, auto. And that is just going to push it right over to the side. And so now we can just come right over to the dev tools and say menu active, and we can test this out. And then I'm just going to Command Z. And then if you do Shift Command Z, you can undo and redo. And this is just a really easy way to check and make sure that all of your classes are working. So what we're doing here is we are letting all of the CSS do the work for us. We are going to write some JavaScript, but the JavaScript is going to be clicking buttons and adding a class and updating an attribute. That's all that the JavaScript does. I want the CSS to do the majority of the work. So next, let's create a script.js. And I'm going to link this right in the head. And we make sure we give this the defer attribute. And first, we're going to define 3 variables: the body, the buttons, and then just the open button. Next, we'll write a function just to toggle the menu. First, we're going to loop through both of our buttons. Then we're going to add an event listener. So when we click on a button, we can go ahead and toggle the menu class on the body and then update the ARIA expanded attribute. And the event listener is click, which is also a tap on a mobile device. So we're actually doing 2 things here when we toggle the body class. We're performing this action of toggling. We're also creating a variable that checks for true or false. So isActive is true if the menu active class has been added to the body. isActive is false if the menu active is not on the body. And then to initialize this, we'll do a DOM content loaded. And now let's test and see if our toggle is working. And it is working. It is adding the menu active class to the body, and that class is doing really all of the heavy lifting. So let's make sure now that we can go back and forth from desktop to mobile. Beautiful. But we have a couple things left that we need to do here. Next, we're going to use isActive in order to update the ARIA expanded to true or false. So if isActive, we're going to set the attribute to true, otherwise it's going to be false. And we're specifically looking at the open button, which is why we defined this particular button separately. So we're looping through the buttons, and we are just checking isActive on the open button only. The first parameter is the name of the attribute, and then the second parameter is what the value should be. And then we'll say else it should be false. And of course, there's no class on the body, and it's false by default. So we'll just go ahead and reload. Now when we open, we have our body class and ARIA expanded true, and then we can close, removes the class, and goes back to ARIA expanded false. So simple. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to write one more function. So when the menu is open, all you have to do is hit the escape key in order to close it. And that is not a requirement for accessibility, but it is a strong recommendation for accessibility for people who use keyboards. And then we'll go ahead and test the accessibility when we're done. And for the escape menu function, we'll do another add event listener, and we're looking for the key down, and then we'll define the key as the escape key. We also check to see if the body has the class menu active. So if the user has hit escape and the body has menu active, class list contains is a true false value. So this is either true or it's false, and both of these conditions have to be met. Then we're going to remove the menu active and set the attribute to false. And then we have to initialize the escape menu function. And finally, the last thing I'm going to do is make our header sticky. So I'm just going to use position sticky. And we'll just say top 0. You have to use at least one inset value. Inset values are top, bottom, left, right, so we'll just say top 0. And there we have a nice sticky header. And so even if this is open, that looks really nice. And we can zoom out a little bit. So we'll see what this would look like on desktop as well. Beautiful. And I have 2 ways to test this. So we're going to test this on desktop first, and then we will test this on my iPhone. We'll start with the desktop. So I'll refresh the page, and then without touching my mouse or touching the trackpad, I'm just going to tab through. And we can see that all of the navigation on desktop, this behaves exactly how I would expect it to. We tab through and then we enter the document, and everything appears to get focused in the correct order. So this works exactly how I would expect it to. So now let's go ahead and pop this into mobile. I'm just going to refresh this again, and without using my mouse or the trackpad, I'm just going to tab into the document. The first thing to get focus is the menu button. The user should always be given the choice to open the navigation. So if the user decides not to open the navigation and continues to tab, they go right back into the document. And that's exactly what we want to have happen. That is the expected accessibility behavior. Now, back up at the button, if I decide that, yes, I do want to open the menu, then I just hit return and I can open the menu. And then when I tab again, now I tab into the nav element. Now, we're not focus trapping. Focus trapping is recommended. It is not a requirement, especially in a situation like this where you can still see the rest of the document. The open menu doesn't cover the entire page. So we can tab through the menu and then we tab into that document, and then of course we can go back. Now I can hit enter to close the menu, and then I can go back up and open it, and say I tab back into the document. Now I can hit escape and I can close that menu, and I don't have to go back into the menu specifically in order to close it. And you can also see here our ARIA expanded, true and false. So if I open, it's ARIA expanded true. We have a menu active on the body. If I close it, we go back to ARIA expanded false, and that body class goes away. If I open it and I hit escape, we have the same behavior. So this is working exactly how I would expect it to work. So let's check this now in Firefox. And I'll refresh the page again. And we have pretty much the same behavior. So for desktop, this works exactly the same way I would expect it to. Let's go ahead and pop this into mobile. And again, that button gets focus. But if we don't open the menu, we go directly into the document. But I can open the menu if I want to, and I can close it. I can open it, and then I can hit escape, and it closes again. So that works exactly how I expect it to. Let's go ahead and check our mobile device. So on my iPhone, this is the Safari browser. I can go ahead and at least open and close. And the styles don't come through very clear when I'm recording, so our borders are here. I don't think you can see them in the recording, but they're definitely working. And we are getting the behavior that I expect. So this is all working. We've got our sticky header. This is all working great. Now I'll go ahead and check Chrome, and Chrome also working. We can see our active states on the links. We can open and close the nav. So this is working great. I'm definitely really happy with this. And that is how I like to build an accessible, responsive nav bar. I think this would work in any project and on any website. Happy coding.